Imagine, like, a high school where the teachers just don't teach.
Right. No lectures.
Exactly. No hour-long lectures at the whiteboard. No one is standing at the front of the room trying to force, 30 teenagers to care about the quadratic equation at the exact same pace.
Which is basically impossible anyway.
Yeah, totally. And there are no frantic adults grading papers at midnight. But, and this is the crazy part, the students in this building are consistently outperforming Ivy League freshmen.
It sounds wild.
It does. They are like mastering complex physics, they're writing code, speaking multiple languages, and all at their own individual speeds. So if I told you this wasn't some, I don't know, utopian science fiction pitch, but a fully engineered, completely funded reality available right now, today, I mean, would you believe me?
Well, I mean, it sounds like a provocation, but the truth is the architecture to make that exact scenario a reality isn't just theoretical anymore. It's sitting right in front of us.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I'll be honest, when I first heard about the document we are diving into today, I was deeply skeptical.
I think most people would be.
Right. But if you are listening to this right now, you're probably someone who loves the mechanics of how things work. You value that aha moment when a complex, messy problem suddenly just clicks into a clear structural pattern.
Yeah, that moment of clarity.
Exactly. And today, we are taking an in-depth exploration of a paper that completely rewired how I view human learning. It's by an independent researcher named Zachary David Enfield, published, well, right now, in May 2026.
And it is titled The Educational Commons, AI and the End of Mediated Learning.
Yeah. And the paper itself is it's fascinating.
It really is a fascinating artifact just in how it's constructed. You know, most policy documents, they stay safely in their lane.
Yeah, they talk about budgets or, like, standardized testing.
Right, or they talk strictly about pedagogy. But Enfield has built this highly unusual hybrid. On the ground floor, it is a rigorous, entirely secular policy analysis.
Lots of data.
Heavy data. It relies heavily on peer-reviewed, randomized controlled trials, federal labor statistics, economic data. But then, instead of concluding with a standard set of bureaucratic recommendations, it scales all the way up to a theological argument.
Which blew my mind.
Yeah, it goes right into an argument about the prophetic end of human-to-human teaching.
And we are definitely going to get to that theological ending, because it is wild.
Yeah.
But I think the core premise we need to establish right now is that this is not a conversation about, throwing some new iPads into a classroom.
No, absolutely not.
Because we've all seen the whole tech revolution in schools that just ends up being shiny distractions.
Yeah, the digital worksheets.
Right. Enfield is making a structural, an economic, and a scientific argument that human classroom teachers will be functionally obsolete as the primary instructional engine within 20 years.
And the twist here is important. He doesn't see this as a dystopian tragedy.
Like the robots taking over.
Exactly. He sees it as a liberation. He views it as the final dissolution of an artificial scarcity.
So it's a good thing.
A profoundly good thing. The argument is that this shift is the only viable way to bring elite, one-on-one, customized tutoring to every single child on Earth.
Regardless of where they live.
Utterly, regardless of their geographic location or their family's wealth.
Right. And I want you, listening right now, to just pause and think back to your own school days. Think about the physical building you walked into. Were you in a district with, like, freshly paved parking lots and state-of-the-art science labs with expensive equipment?
A catalog of electives that rivaled a small college.
Yeah. Or, on the flip side, were you in a building where the heating broke in February, the textbooks were missing the last 3 chapters, and your science lab was basically a sink that barely worked?
It's a stark contrast.
It really is. And we all know that disparity exists. But Enfield argues that this disparity isn't just an unfortunate bug in the American education system. It is, like, the defining feature.
He calls this the purchasing lottery.
The purchasing lottery.
Yeah, and the foundation of his critique is that the United States does not actually have an educational system.
Wait, what do we have then?
We have a localized real estate purchasing system that occasionally dispenses education.
Wow. Okay, I know schools are funded locally, mostly by property taxes, but break down the actual spread for us. Like, how wide is the gap between the haves and the have-nots when we look at the raw numbers?
Well, let's look at the National Education Association's rankings and estimates for the 2024-25 fiscal year. If you just glance at the top line national average, it sits at around $17,840 per student.
Okay, almost 18 grand.
Right, but averages are incredibly deceptive. They smooth out the extremes. In New York, the public expenditure is actually $32,370 per student.
Whoa!
Yeah, and the District of Columbia and Vermont are hovering right around that $30,000 mark as well.
So roughly 30 grand to educate one kid for 9 months.
Yes. Now let's cross the country. Look at Idaho. Idaho spends $11,578 per student.
That's a massive drop.
It is. Tennessee is at $11,723. Arizona is just under $12,000. So you are looking at a spread of over $20,000 per student per year between the highest and lowest funded states.
Okay, wait, let me do that math. Let's take a standard classroom of 30 kids. In New York, that room has almost $1 million of funding behind it.
Correct.
But in Idaho, that exact same room of 30 kids has about, what, $340,000 behind it?
Roughly, yes.
That's a difference of over $600,000 for a single classroom. That is insane.
It is entirely structurally disjointed. And Enfield's point is that you have states operating in the same nation, under the same federal constitution, competing in the same domestic economy, yet the financial foundation varies almost threefold.
Yeah, that's not a foundation.
No, it isn't. It is a lottery.
And this leads into what he calls the clean measurement fallacy, right? Because we don't treat these kids like they come from different economic universes when it's time to take the SATs, do we?
We absolutely do not. Society measures all of these students against each other.
Line them all up.
Exactly. We use standardized test scores, graduation rates, college admissions, we line them up and rank them, but we are doing this under the mathematically false pretense that they all started at the same baseline.
It's like organizing a marathon where the entrance fee dictates your footwear.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So kid A gets to the starting line, and because their zip code is wealthy, they're handed those high-tech, carbon-plated running shoes that practically propel you forward.
Right.
And kid B shows up. Their district has no money, so they have to run the 26.2 miles in flip-flops.
Or barefoot.
Exactly. And then the rest of us stand at the finish line with our stopwatches, just completely shocked when the kids in the carbon spikes cross the finish line first. And what's worse, we often blame the kids in the flip-flops for not having enough, like, grit or resilience.
The marathon analogy is very apt, but I would actually push it even further.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's not just the footwear, it's that the track itself is paved for one runner and covered in mud and hurdles for the other.
Ah, right. The environment itself.
Exactly. You cannot give one district gigabit internet, modern HVAC systems, robust nutrition programs, and heavily supported teachers, while giving another district crumbling infrastructure and exhausted staff, and then pretend a math test measures the same inherent capability in both students.
It's mathematically bankrupt.
Enfield argues this is like weighing two different people on two different scales, one calibrated correctly and one fundamentally broken, and then pretending the resulting numbers mean the exact same thing.
So if the current system is fundamentally unjust, and honestly, people have been pointing out this funding disparity for decades, what is Enfield's structural solution? Because usually the argument just devolves into, well, we need to raise taxes and send more money to poorer districts, which never seems to politically happen.
All right, the political gridlock is real, so instead of relying on a political reallocation of local taxes, Enfield proposes what he calls the common plumb line.
Like the tool masons use to build a wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A plumb line is just a weight suspended on a string. It is a tool of pure physics. It doesn't flatter the architect, it doesn't care about the builder's ego, it just drops straight down and tells you objectively whether the wall you are building is crooked or straight.
So how does that apply to schools?
Enfield is arguing that American education requires a national common plumb line, an absolute, unshakable baseline of curriculum, knowledge, and AI-driven resources that is guaranteed to every single student, completely insulated from their local tax base.
Okay, I have a massive flag on the play here.
Go for it.
Anytime someone proposes a national baseline, the immediate pushback, and I think it's a valid one, is that it risks completely erasing local culture.
Sure.
Like, if every kid from a rural farming town in Wyoming to a dense urban neighborhood in Chicago is forced into the exact same standardized digital textbook, don't we lose the entire flavor of local community? Feels like it could easily become a forced ceiling where nobody is allowed to be unique.
Enfield anticipates that exact friction, and he makes a very deliberate distinction here. A plumb line provides a common floor, not a forced ceiling.
A floor, not a ceiling.
Right. The string tells you if the foundation is level. It does not dictate what kind of house you build on top of it. It doesn't tell you what color to paint the walls or what furniture to move in.
So the baseline just ensures basic survival and structural integrity.
Yes. The foundational grammar, the algebra, the core scientific method, that shouldn't depend on whether your town has a strong tax base. That is the floor.
Makes sense.
But local communities are entirely free to build their unique identities on top of that floor. A district in Iowa might layer on advanced agricultural science.
Or a district in New Orleans might integrate deep musical theory.
Exactly. Culinary arts, local history. The crucial architectural shift is simply this. No child is ever allowed to fall through the floor just because their district couldn't afford the baseline.
Okay, I track with the philosophy. A solid floor for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But here is where we have to shift from the desire for a better system to the actual hard mechanics of how learning works.
Right, the implementation.
Yeah, because wanting a common floor is great, but how do you actually build it without it costing an impossible amount of money? And this brings us to a really fascinating piece of history in the paper. Enfield goes all the way back to 1984.
He goes back to Benjamin Bloom.
Who is that?
In the landscape of educational psychology, Bloom is an absolute titan. In 1984, he published a paper that essentially identified a structural anomaly in human learning.
An anomaly.
Yes. It became known as the 2 sigma problem, and it has been the holy grail for educators ever since.
Break down the mechanics of this 2 sigma effect for us. What did Bloom's team actually do?
So Bloom and his graduate researchers set up a controlled environment to test different modalities of teaching. They established 3 distinct conditions.
Right.
The first was the conventional classroom. 1 teacher, roughly 30 students, standard pacing, periodic tests.
The baseline of modern education.
Exactly. The second condition was mastery learning. This is still a group setting, but students are required to actually prove proficiency, like they have to score highly on a unit, before the class moves on to the next topic.
Which makes intuitive sense. You shouldn't move on to multiplication if half the room still doesn't understand addition.
Right.
But mastery learning is incredibly difficult to do with 30 kids because one kid might need 10 minutes and another might need 10 days.
It is logistically punishing for a single human teacher.
Totally.
But when Bloom managed to facilitate it, that mastery learning condition produced an improvement of 1 standard deviation, or 1 sigma, over the conventional baseline.
That's a massive jump just from changing the pacing.
It is. But it was the third condition that changed everything.
What was the third?
The third group received one-on-one individualized tutoring combined with mastery learning, and the results were completely explosive.
Explosive how?
The students in this condition performed at a level 2 standard deviations above the conventional classroom average.
The 2 sigma effect. Now, I know standard deviations can sound like abstract statistical jargon. Put that into a real-world perspective for me. If I am a perfectly average student in a normal classroom and I suddenly get 2 sigma tutoring, where do I end up?
It shifts you to the 98th percentile.
Wait.
The average tutored student outperformed 98% of the conventionally taught students.
The average tutored student beats 98 out of 100 normal kids.
Yes.
That is unbelievable.
To understand the magnitude of that, in standard educational research, if you introduce a new reading program or a new teaching style, and you achieve an effect size of maybe 0.4 standard deviations, that is considered a monumental success.
Right.
You write a book, you go on a speaking tour. Bloom found an effect size of 2.0. It wasn't a slight improvement, it was a fundamental phase shift in cognitive development.
So, okay, if we've had this blueprint since 1984, right? If we knew that just pairing 1 adult with 1 child essentially turns average kids into absolute top-tier academic performers, why in the world didn't we just redesign the whole system around tutors? Why have we spent 40 years still lecturing to rooms of 30 kids?
We ran straight into a brick wall of pure economics.
The money.
The money. Let's look at the math. To provide one-on-one human tutoring for a student over a full school year requires roughly 900 to 1,000 hours of an educator's time.
Okay.
If you take the current U.S. average teacher salary, factor in benefits, administrative overhead, facility costs, you're looking at an hourly rate of about $50 to $75.
So 1,000 hours at $75 an hour.
Yeah.
That is $75,000 per student per year.
Now multiply that by the 48.8 million public school students currently in the United States.
Okay, let me just do that in my head.
Yeah.
50 million kids times 75 grand. You're looking at, what, over $3 trillion?
The exact estimate is somewhere between $2.2 and $3.7 trillion annually.
Trillion, with a T.
With a T, which represents roughly 8 to 13% of the entire United States gross domestic product.
Wow.
It is completely structurally impossible. No society on Earth could bear that cost.
Not just for education, anyway.
Right. And Bloom himself admitted this in his 1984 paper. He said one-to-one tutoring is too costly for most societies to bear on a large scale.
So the Two Sigma problem wasn't a problem of understanding how kids learn best.
No.
The problem was trying to find cheap group instruction methods that could somehow artificially replicate the results of expensive tutoring.
Precisely. We spent 40 years looking for a cheap imitation of the real thing.
Man, here's where it gets really interesting. Because for 40 years, one-on-one tutoring has been like a bespoke, hand-tailored suit on Savile Row.
Great analogy.
Right. Flawless, custom fit to your exact measurements, absolutely beautiful, but only available to the absolute elite, the billionaires who can afford a private governess.
Everyone else gets off the rack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The rest of us had to take the one-size-fits-all classroom. But here is where Enfield drops the hammer. He argues that in the last 3 years, the entire paradigm has shifted because AI just figured out how to mass-produce that bespoke Savile Row suit for the price of a cheap T-shirt.
He calls this the marginal cost dissolution.
The dissolution of the barrier.
Yes, the barrier that defined the Two Sigma problem for 4 decades hasn't been solved by some clever new pedagogical trick. The barrier simply evaporated into thin air.
Because of the tech.
Right. Today, frontier AI tutoring systems cost between 10 cents and $2 per hour of interaction.
10 cents to $2 an hour.
Yes.
So if I have 48.8 million kids, what is the math on that for universal coverage?
Even if we use the absolute highest end of that spectrum, providing universal unlimited AI tutoring for every K-12 student in America would cost roughly $30 to $50 billion annually.
$50 billion, which sounds like a lot until you remember what we just said we are currently spending on K-12 education.
It is less than 5% of the current total K-12 public expenditure.
That's nothing.
The Two Sigma cost barrier is dead. What works best is now vastly cheaper than what we are currently doing. As Enfield notes, the conversation has permanently shifted. The question is no longer how can we possibly afford to do this? The question is what specific institutional holdout is preventing us from doing it tomorrow?
Okay, I have to stop you there.
Sure.
Because it is one thing to say AI is incredibly cheap. It is a completely different thing to claim it actually tutors as effectively as a human being with a master's degree.
It's a bold claim.
Right. I mean, we've all argued with a customer service chatbot that couldn't understand a basic request. Where is the hard, empirical proof that an AI can actually deliver a Two Sigma pedagogical effect?
This is exactly why Enfield anchors his paper in recent randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. He is not talking about hypothetical capabilities. He is looking at verified evidence from the field.
Okay, lay it on me.
Let's start with the Keston study at Harvard University.
Harvard undergrad physics, so not exactly spelling tests. We're talking high-level conceptual difficulty.
Extremely high. This RCT was published in Scientific Reports in June 2025, and crucially, they did not set the AI up against a lazy baseline.
What do you mean?
They didn't compare the AI to a bored professor reading monotonously from a podium. They tested the AI tutor against in-class active learning.
Remind me, what is active learning?
It is currently considered the absolute gold standard of human pedagogy. It involves group problem-solving, peer discussion, immediate feedback from human instructors.
Oh, so it's very engaging.
Yes, it is the best we currently know how to do in a classroom.
So it's AI versus the absolute peak of human instruction. What happened?
The students who are tutored exclusively by the AI outperform the students in the human-led active learning classrooms by 0.73 to 1.3 standard deviations on their post-intervention tests.
Whoa. You mentioned earlier that a 0.4 effect size is considered massive.
It is.
So this AI beat the best human professors by double or triple that margin.
It fundamentally outperformed them on pure cognitive gains.
That's incredible.
But it wasn't just test scores. The researchers tracked secondary metrics too. The AI-tutored groups showed significantly decreased dropout rates, vastly increased time on task engagement, and perhaps most importantly, the gains were seen across all ability levels.
So it wasn't just making the smart kids smarter.
Exactly. It lifted the struggling kids over the conceptual hurdles that usually make them give up entirely.
Okay, that is Ivy League undergraduates, though. They are already highly motivated. They have massive resources.
That's true.
A skeptic could say, sure, AI works for the hyper-elite. What about a totally different environment? What about kids who aren't at Harvard?
That is the exact counter-argument Enfield anticipates, which is why he immediately points to a World Bank RCT conducted in Nigeria.
Oh.
Yeah, published by DeSimone and colleagues in May 2025.
Paint the picture for us. What did this intervention look like on the ground?
This took place in Benin City. It was a 6-week after-school intervention for secondary school students. They utilized an AI tutoring system powered by GPT-4. The students would sit with basic connected devices, like tablets or phones. The human teachers were still in the room, but their role had completely shifted. They weren't lecturing. They acted as orchestra conductors.
Orchestra conductors. What does that mean in practice?
The human teacher would monitor dashboards, ensure the students were on task, maybe guide a high-level prompt. But the actual moment-to-moment instruction, the why did you carry the one here, or explain this vocabulary word.
The checking for understanding part.
Yes, the endless loop of checking for understanding was handled entirely by the AI. The AI was having individualized, localized text and voice conversations with each student simultaneously.
So 30 different personalized lessons happening in the same room all at once.
Exactly.
And the results after just 6 weeks.
The results were historic. In a 6-week period, the students achieved learning gains equivalent to 1.5 to 2 years of business-as-usual schooling.
Wait, I want to make sure I am understanding this. 6 weeks of spending a little time after school with an AI tutor equaled up to 2 full years of sitting in a normal classroom.
That is exactly what the data showed.
I want you to really let that sink in. Imagine your own life. Imagine you wanted to learn Mandarin, or you needed to master advanced calculus, or, understand organic chemistry.
The hard stuff.
Right. Imagine compressing 2 years of frustrating, slow, confusing classroom struggle into a month and a half of smooth, localized, perfectly paced conversation. How much friction, how much anxiety would that have removed from your life?
It changes the entire timeline of human cognitive development, and the World Bank actually contextualized this data when they compared this 6-week AI intervention to their entire database of educational interventions in developing countries.
A massive database, I assume.
A database spanning decades of research. Billions of dollars, thousands of programs. This single AI program outperformed 80% of them.
That is just staggering.
And the evidence is converging from multiple vectors. Enfield cites a 2024 study by Pardos and Bundari in PLOS-1, the tutor co-pilot study, and the massive late 2025 EDI study on math tutoring.
All pointing the same way.
They all point in the exact same direction. When AI is allowed to drive the instructional conversation, with humans providing oversight and basic structure, it utterly eclipses traditional whole group instruction.
All right, I hear the data. But I have to push back hard here, because there's a glaring flaw with large language models that everyone knows about.
The hallucinations.
Yes, they hallucinate. They can be confidently, dangerously wrong. I've asked AI to summarize articles, and it completely invents quotes.
Oh, absolutely.
So isn't there a massive, unacceptable risk of an AI leading a 10-year-old down a completely fabricated conceptual path? What happens if you just unleash a raw chatbot on a kid?
You're hitting on the critical vulnerability of the technology, and Enfield does not shy away from it. He specifically cites a 2025 study by Bastani and colleagues to address this exact fear.
And what do they find?
Well, in that study, researchers basically did what you just suggested. They took a raw generative AI chatbot with no specific pedagogical rules and gave it to high school math students.
And it was a disaster.
It actively harmed their learning. The students who had access to the raw chatbot performed worse on subsequent assessments than the students who had no AI at all.
Wait, really? Why? If the AI is so smart, why did it make them worse?
Because of how it interacted. A raw chatbot is designed to be a helpful assistant. If you ask it for the answer to a math problem, it just gives you the answer.
Oh, so they just cheated.
It acts as an incredibly efficient crutch. The students used it to bypass the cognitive struggle of actually learning the mechanism. They got the homework done perfectly, but when the test came, their brains hadn't formed the necessary pathways.
Okay, so how does that not completely invalidate the Harvard and Nigeria studies?
Because it proves that implementation is everything. The Harvard and Nigeria interventions didn't just hand kids a raw ChatGPT login. They used what Enfield calls engineered instructional architecture.
Engineered architecture.
The AI was constrained by strict pedagogical rules. If a student asked for the answer, the AI was programmed to refuse. Instead, it was forced to use the Socratic method. It would ask a leading question like, what is the first step you think we should take? If the student got it wrong, the AI would isolate the error and ask them to reconsider.
So it was acting like a real tutor, not an answer key.
Precisely. When the pedagogical scaffolding is correct, the AI outperforms human classrooms. When the scaffolding is absent, it acts as a harmful crutch.
That makes total sense.
Enfield's argument is that the technology is ready, but it must be structured as a dedicated educational environment, not just an open-ended text box.
It is a highly potent tool,
Yeah.
and you need a handle to swing it safely.
Exactly.
But this brings up the massive, unavoidable elephant in the room. If this AI is this effective, and it costs pennies on the dollar, and it scales infinitely, people are going to panic.
The labor panic.
Yes, the immediate visceral reaction from society, and we are already seeing this, is the fear of job loss. People are going to scream, AI is going to steal all the teachers' jobs. We are going to have millions of unemployed educators.
And this is where Enfield makes one of the most compelling, counterintuitive pivots in the entire paper.
How does he pivot?
He argues that the public is fundamentally misdiagnosing the situation. We are looking at this completely backwards.
Backwards how?
The human teaching profession isn't being violently disrupted by a new AI technology. The human teaching profession is already structurally collapsing, and AI is arriving just in time to stop the bleeding.
Stop the bleeding.
Yes. The job-stealing myth completely ignores the terrifying labor reality on the ground right now.
I mean, I see hiring signs for schools sometimes, but is it really a systemic collapse? Maybe it's just a lingering post-pandemic slump.
The data suggests it is a terminal structural decline. Enfield pulls from the Learning Policy Institute's 2025 data. Nationwide, roughly 1 in 8 teaching positions in the United States are either completely unfilled or they are staffed by people who are entirely uncertified to teach that subject.
1 in 8. That's over 12% of the entire workforce. How many bodies is that?
Over 411,000 teaching jobs.
411,000 classrooms without a qualified teacher. Think about a standard school with, say, 40 classrooms. That means 5 of those rooms just have a random substitute or an uncertified warm body sitting at the desk every single day.
Yes. The National Center for Education Statistics surveyed districts for the 2024-25 school year. 74% of all public school districts reported profound systemic difficulties in hiring.
74%.
And in some states, the numbers are deeply alarming. In Texas, 31% of all new teacher hires lacked a state teaching permit.
Almost a third.
Almost a third of the incoming workforce was uncredentialed. The system is hemorrhaging talent, and it cannot replace it.
And for the teachers who are still there, who have stayed through all of this, they have to be taking on the weight of those empty rooms.
The burnout is catastrophic. K-12 teaching is currently the most burnout profession in the United States economy.
The most burnt out.
Gallup and Rand Corporation data consistently show that between 44 and 52% of teachers report feeling burnt out, often or always.
Half the workforce.
And the trajectory over time is what worries researchers the most. Enfield cites an Ed Working paper study that tracked teacher enthusiasm over a 50-year span. In the year 2010, 60% of teachers said they were enthusiastic about their jobs.
Okay.
By 2020, that number had plummeted to just 20%.
A drop from 60 to 20 in a single decade.
And the pipeline to replace them is drying up. Enrollment in university teacher training programs has dropped 33% over roughly the same period. Young people are looking at the realities of the profession and actively choosing to do anything else.
Okay, let me try to reconcile this because there is a huge paradox here.
What's the paradox?
Let's go back to segment 1. You noted that we are spending an average of almost $18,000 per student. And Enfield mentions that even adjusted for inflation, real spending per student is actually up 25% since 2002.
That is correct.
We are pumping a quarter more money into the system in real value. So if spending is up, shouldn't we see at least some stabilization? Shouldn't test scores be rising? Why are we pouring water into a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom?
That is the exact paradox. We are spending vastly more money to achieve demonstrably worse results. Look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, often called the nation's report card.
What does it say?
The NAEP scores show that 45% of high school seniors are testing below basic achievement levels in math. That is up from 40% in 2019.
Nearly half.
Nearly half of the students graduating high school do not possess basic mathematical literacy. Reading scores are flat or declining. The achievement gap between wealthy and poor districts is widening.
So the institutional defenders of the current system, the people saying we just need more time and more money, What is their plan?
Enfield argues that they have no mechanism to reverse this trend within the existing architecture. You cannot magically conjure 500,000 highly qualified, enthusiastic math and physics teachers out of thin air when the university pipeline is down 33%.
Right. You can't just will them into existence.
Exactly. So, returning to the job-stealing myth, AI is not pushing teachers out of a thriving, highly successful profession. AI is a lifeboat for a sinking ship. To argue that we must restrict AI to protect teachers' jobs is asking society to artificially preserve a labor configuration that is simultaneously failing on inputs, like staffing and morale, and failing on outputs, like student achievement.
It's an indefensible position when you look at the raw data.
It is. But Enfield goes further. He argues that the failure isn't just academic or economic, it is profoundly physical.
Okay, we need to take a brief pause here. I want to give a quick Siri heads up to you listening. We are about to shift gears. We've been talking about test scores, budgets, labor statistics, but schools are physical places where we mandate children to go for 8 hours a day. This next section deals with the physical and emotional realities of what happens when you put vulnerable children into isolated rooms with burnt-out adults. We are going to discuss documented patterns of abuse. It is heavy, it is uncomfortable, but it is absolutely crucial to understanding Enfield's argument about why the architecture of education must radically change.
We have to look at what Enfield calls the safety floor. He relies strictly on federal documented data to examine the hidden costs of the adult authority model. And maintaining strict impartiality, the numbers are deeply unsettling.
What exactly does the federal data show regarding educator misconduct?
A comprehensive 2004 study by the Department of Education, which was later corroborated and expanded upon by researcher Cheryl Shakeshaft's 2023 multi-state survey, estimates that between 10 and 11.7% of K-12 students will experience some form of educator sexual misconduct by the time they graduate high school.
I need to say that again. 1 in 10 kids. If you have a graduating class of 300 students, 30 of them have experienced abuse from the very professionals tasked with their care. That is a horrifying structural failure.
It is a systemic vulnerability, and the damage is often compounded by the serial nature of the offenders. A 2010 investigation by the Government Accountability Office found that a single offending teacher could have up to 73 student victims before finally being caught and removed.
How does someone victimize 70 kids before anyone notices? How does the institution allow that?
Through an institutional phenomenon informally known as passing the trash.
Passing the trash.
The GAO report documented how school districts, desperate to avoid a massive public scandal, parental panic, or crushing legal liability, will often strike a quiet deal with an offending employee.
A deal?
Yes. The abuser is allowed to resign quietly. The district agrees to seal or scrub their personnel file and provide a neutral reference.
So they just leave with a clean record.
And they are completely free to find employment and a fresh pool of victims in a neighboring school district.
That is sick.
The GAO investigation examined 15 specific cases of systemic abuse. In 4 of those 15 cases, this exact passing the trash practice occurred. Furthermore, 11 of the 15 offenders investigated had prior victims at other schools before their current arrest. The architecture of the institution actively obscured the danger to protect its own reputation.
And it isn't just sexual misconduct either. There is also the reality of physical violence, which is somehow still sanctioned in parts of the country.
Yes. Corporal punishment, the intentional striking of a child by an educator, remains completely legal in 17 U.S. states. According to data from the Department of Education, approximately 70,000 students were legally struck by teachers or administrators in 2022.
70,000.
And the application of this violence is heavily skewed. A 2018 GAO report on discipline disparities found that Black children, boys, and students with disabilities are wildly disproportionately targeted for physical punishment, restraint, and seclusion compared to their peers.
Okay, this is incredibly dark. And my question here is, how does AI factor into this deeply human tragedy? Because Enfield isn't making some weird moral claim that a line of computer code is more ethical than a human being, is he?
No, and that is a vital distinction. Enfield's point is not a claim about the moral superiority of machines, it is an architectural observation. He introduces the concept that AI instruction possesses constitutive protective property.
Meaning safety isn't a policy, it's built into the physics of the interaction.
Exactly. An AI tutor literally cannot lose its temper and throw a chair. An AI cannot physically strike a student who is acting out. An AI has no physical body with which to groom a child.
It's structurally impossible.
And crucially, every single keystroke, every voice interaction, instruction, every moment a child spends with an AI tutor is logged, searchable, and infinitely auditable.
There are no secret conversations in an empty classroom after the bell rings.
Precisely. The current educational architecture mandates that we place highly stressed, isolated adult humans in positions of unquestioned authority over vulnerable children behind closed doors. Enfield argues that the physical and relational properties of human beings make abuse functionally inevitable at scale. The AI substrate simply lacks the physical properties necessary to execute these documented patterns of abuse.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here. I understand the architectural safety argument. But taking all the humans out of direct instruction feels like throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
How so?
School is more than just downloading data into a kid's brain safely. We need humans for embodied care. An AI might not hit a kid, but a robot also has no idea if a kid comes to school with a black eye, or if they haven't eaten breakfast, or if they are sitting quietly in the corner because their parents are getting a divorce.
Right.
An algorithm can't hug a crying first grader. Don't we lose the entire soul of the school?
That is a very natural reaction, but it is based on a profound misunderstanding of Enfield's vision. He completely agrees with you.
Well, he does.
He is not advocating for empty, sterile warehouses run by server farms. He explicitly states that human adults remain absolutely vital to the school building, but their fundamental roles must shift.
So what are the humans doing if they aren't teaching the curriculum?
You separate the cognitive academic instruction from the embodied human care. Right now, we ask a teacher to manage the emotional well-being of 30 kids while simultaneously forcing them to hit a standardized testing benchmark in algebra within 45 minutes.
It's an impossible dual mandate.
Yes. If the AI assumes the heavy lifting of direct, individualized cognitive instruction, the human adults are liberated. They become dedicated mentors, guardians, coaches, and counselors.
Ah. You remove the friction of the academic demand from the human relationship.
Yes. The human is there specifically to notice the bruised eye. They are there to facilitate physical group projects, to mediate social conflicts on the playground, to coach debate, to run the theater program, to be a safe, supportive presence. You don't eliminate the human, you elevate them from an overworked lecturer to a profound mentor.
That reframes the whole concept. If I am not terrified of failing my teacher's math test, I might actually open up to them about what's going on at home. The dynamic changes from compliance to true mentorship.
It is absolute role clarification.
Okay, so if we accept this new architecture, AI is handling the direct instruction at a 2 sigma level, and humans are providing mentorship and safety. How does this actually change the day-to-day lived experience of a student? Because right now, the rhythm of a student's life is dictated by the 180-day school calendar. We go to school from September to June, take 3 months off, and start over.
And Enfield argues that the 180-day calendar is perhaps the most glaring inefficiency in the entire system. It is a lingering industrial habit, often falsely attributed to an agrarian past, that actively harms learning.
Why is it so harmful?
Let's run the math on what Enfield calls time equity recovery. A standard calendar year has roughly 260 weekdays. The current 180-day model leaves 80 weekdays completely outside the educational structure. That is a massive amount of unutilized time.
Especially when you consider the summer slide.
Exactly. Johns Hopkins University research shows severe summer learning loss, where students forget significant portions of math and reading over the long break. And this disproportionately harms lower-income students who don't have access to expensive summer camps or enrichment programs.
So what is the alternative schedule?
Enfield models an aggressive full-year calendar. Imagine a schedule where students get 1 full week off every single quarter.
Okay.
They still get robust, regular breaks to avoid burnout, plus all major holidays. Under that model, you achieve 240 instructional days a year.
That's 60 extra days a year.
Now compound that. Across the 13 years of K-12 education, adding 60 days a year recovers 780 instructional days. If you divide that by the traditional 180-day year, that model recovers 4.3 traditional school years of instructional time.
Wait, you essentially give a kid an entire high school education's worth of extra time just by closing the summer gap.
Yes. Even if you use a moderate model, say 2 weeks off per quarter, you still recover 2.9 traditional school years. And this recovered time intersects beautifully with how AI changes the curriculum materials themselves.
Right, because if kids are moving this fast, you can't just hand them a dusty textbook from 2016. He talks about the textbook evolving into a living commons.
The physical 10-year-old textbook is a symbol of the purchasing lottery. It is frozen in time. Enfield proposes that the educational commons should be a fully digital, interactive public infrastructure. He describes a two-layer living curriculum.
What are the two layers?
The first is the stable foundation. This contains the durables, basic grammar, the laws of thermodynamics, foundational algebra, historical timelines. These concepts don't change rapidly.
And the second?
The second layer is the living frontier. This is where the curriculum updates in real time. If a new archaeological site is unearthed in Egypt, or if a major breakthrough in mRNA vaccines occurs, or if the Supreme Court hands down a landmark civics decision, the curriculum absorbs it immediately. The AI tutor integrates the news into the lesson the very next day.
The student encounters the field as it is actually living and breathing, not as a static historical artifact.
Exactly. And because the AI tutor is completely individualized, it allows for true mastery-based advancement. You move forward the second you master the concept, not based on fulfilling an arbitrary amount of seat time.
So if I intuitively grasp fractions in a week, I move on. I don't sit in the back of the class doodling in my notebook for a month while the teacher tries to catch everyone else up.
And conversely, if you struggle with fractions, the AI spends 3 weeks with you, patiently trying hundreds of different analogies until it clicks without you ever feeling the shame of holding the rest of the class back.
It's like, we currently treat education like a massive passenger train. Everyone in the 5th grade boards the train at the exact same time in September.
Right.
The train moves at unyielding speed. And you can only get off at the scheduled stops completely, regardless of how fast your brain can process the scenery going by. If you are bored, too bad. If you are confused and want to look closer, too bad. The train keeps moving.
It just chugs along.
Enfield is saying we should blow up the train and give every single kid their own autonomous vehicle programmed to drive at their exact optimal cognitive speed.
That is a phenomenal conceptualization of the shift. And because of the compounded effects of recovering 4.3 years of time, combined with the extreme efficiency of mastery-based AI tutoring, Enfield calculates that a significant portion of the population could finish the foundational K-12 requirements by age 14 or 15.
Graduating high school at 14, what do they do then? They enter the real world vastly earlier. And the massive public savings generated by finishing K-12 early could be redirected to fund debt-free college, advanced vocational trade schools, or paid public apprenticeships. You fundamentally alter the economic trajectory of the American teenager.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly logical, highly efficient, and deeply liberating. But we don't live in a vacuum of pure logic. We live in the real world.
Very true.
You cannot propose upending a trillion-dollar industry, rendering the traditional role of millions of workers obsolete, and expect the institutions in power to just politely clap and step aside. There has to be massive resistance to this.
There is, and Enfield tackles it head-on in a segment he calls Throne Protection. He focuses extensively on the response of the massive teachers' unions, and again, he breaks this down highly objectively. In 2025, we saw major alliances form. The American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association established highly publicized partnerships with tech giants, companies like Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic.
So the unions aren't fighting AI. They are embracing it.
They are embracing a very specific, heavily curated framing of AI. The rhetorical slogan heavily utilized by the unions, championed by leaders like AFT President Randy Weingarten, is teachers in the driver's seat.
What does that actually mean in policy terms?
It means they argue that the direct, unmediated connection between a human teacher and a student is sacred and irreplaceable. Therefore, AI should only ever be deployed as a background tool, an assistant to help the human teacher write lesson plans or generate quizzes or analyze data, but the human must remain the primary bottleneck of direct instruction.
Teachers in the driver's seat. Honestly, that sounds perfectly reasonable on the surface. We trust humans.
It sounds reasonable until you test it against the data. Enfield calls this exact framing throne protection. He impartially analyzes the union's motive. A union exists fundamentally to protect the current employment configurations and labor power of its dues-paying members. That is its legal and historical purpose. It is doing its job. However, Enfield points out the harsh reality. What protects the traditional human job configuration is no longer what produces the best educational outcomes for children.
Right, because we go back to the Harvard and Nigeria RCTs. The data definitively proved that when AI is actually put in the driver's seat for direct cognitive instruction, student outcomes absolutely soar. Keeping the human as the bottleneck actively suppresses the 2 sigma potential.
Exactly. Enfield argues we must ruthlessly separate labor policy from educational pedagogy. We cannot suppress a technological breakthrough that benefits children simply because it disrupts adult employment models.
Understand the data, but I still feel this intuitive pushback. Isn't it just supreme technological hubris to think a machine can completely replace the human act of teaching? I mean, look at history. When the pocket calculator was invented, people panicked, but it didn't replace math teachers. It just became a tool that the math teacher used.
Enfield has an exact philosophical rebuttal to that line of thinking. He writes, "A telescope doesn't abolish astronomy, and a microscope doesn't make the scientist meaningless."
Oh, that's good.
The telescope drastically expands what the astronomer can see, but it does the seeing. AI is the telescope. It handles the immense heavy lifting of direct, cognitive, computational instruction. It delivers the data flawlessly.
And the human.
The human being is still required to look through the lens, interpret the findings for the child's life, guide their emotional reaction, and cultivate their character. The union's error, according to Enfield, is conflating protecting teachers' jobs as academic lecturers with protecting children's holistic development. As we discussed, the roles must separate.
Okay, so let's project this forward. Enfield's whole thesis relies on the idea that this human as lecturer model will be undeniably functionally obsolete in 20 years. To really grasp where this is going, we have to look at the trajectory of the technology.
We do.
Where exactly is AI right now, today, in 2026? Because a lot of people still think of it as just a fancy autocomplete that writes bad poetry.
To dispel that notion, Enfield lists the verified public benchmarks that frontier models are currently achieving. Let's look at the GPQA Diamond benchmark. This is a rigorous test of graduate-level reasoning in physics, biology, and chemistry. The questions are so incredibly dense and difficult that human experts, PhDs with credentials in those specific fields, only score between 65 and 74%.
So a human PhD gets roughly a C or a D on this test.
Yes. As of early 2026, models like Google's Gemini 3 Pro score 94% on that exact same benchmark. The specialized OMIC AI scientist scores 93.3%.
The AI is already blowing past human PhDs in their own highly specialized fields.
Correct. Look at the Frontier Math benchmark, which tests massive research-level mathematics, problems that take human mathematicians hours or even days to solve. AI is currently solving nearly 50% of them autonomously. AI has achieved gold medal performance on the International Mathematical Olympiad. It routinely passes the bar exam at the 90th percentile.
What about medicine? That requires more than just raw math.
AI passes the USMLE Step 1 medical licensing exam at over 90% accuracy. And importantly, it scores 90% on the soft-skill medical questions, the scenarios that require complex ethical judgment, empathy, and patient bedside manner. The baseline reality of 2026 is that AI is already operating at a generalized, superhuman PhD level across nearly all cognitive domains.
Okay, that is the baseline today. But Enfield is projecting 20 years out to 2046. How does he model the growth over the next 2 decades? Because it won't just stay at this current level.
To calculate the horizon, Enfield uses a crucial study released in March 2025 by METR, an AI evaluation organization. They measured the effective compute and capability growth of frontier models. METR found a deeply consistent trend. The length of a complex task that an AI can complete autonomously with at least 50% reliability doubles every 7 months.
Wait. Doubles every 7 months. That isn't a linear progression. That is a terrifyingly steep exponential curve. Okay, run the math on that for us.
Let's do the compounding math. 20 years from 2026 takes us to 2046. 20 years is 240 months. If the capability doubles every 7 months, you divide 240 by 7. That gives you roughly 34 doublings.
Okay, so 2 to the power of 34.
Yes. 2 to the 34th power is approximately 17 billion.
17 billion.
Yes. Let me contextualize what that multiplier means. A deeply complex cognitive task that takes a frontier AI 14 hours of continuous processing to complete today, in 2026, will take a comparable AI 1/10 of a billionth of a second in 2046.
The human brain cannot conceptualize a billionth of a second. It's like compounding interest, but applied to pure raw intelligence.
Exactly. Now, Enfield is a rigorous analyst. He acknowledges that this exact curve might not hold perfectly for 20 years. It will likely face friction, massive energy constraints, bottlenecks in data center construction, or physical limits of silicon compute. But his structural conclusion is unshakable. Even if you drastically slow that curve down, even if you cut it in half, the resulting gap between human and machine cognition becomes completely insurmountable.
How could it not be? How can any human adult, standing at a whiteboard in front of 30 kids, relying on a static college degree they earned a decade or two ago, possibly claim to be the best source of knowledge? How do they compete with an intelligence that operates millions or billions of times faster, that possesses all recorded human knowledge, and can perfectly tailor its delivery to the individual psychology of the child? They can't.
They absolutely cannot, which is the ultimate mathematical proof of Enfield's thesis. The role of the human must pivot entirely to empathy, physical safety, and mentorship. The human is no longer the oracle of knowledge. They become a co-learner walking alongside the child as the AI provides the map.
And this profound structural inevitable shift in the very nature of how human beings transmit knowledge from one generation to the next, this is what leads Enfield to the final and undoubtedly the most surprising turn in his entire paper.
Yes. Having laid out an exhaustive case built on labor economics, randomized trials, and compute scaling laws, Enfield dramatically shifts the register of the document. He moves from secular policy into deep theology.
I have to admit, when I got to the end of the paper, I had a little bit of whiplash. How does a researcher go from citing World Bank data and AI doubling curves to quoting the Old Testament? What is the connection he makes?
For Enfield, the policy work and the economic data are not the ultimate point. They're merely the operational scaffolding that is facilitating a deeper universal truth. He concludes the document by examining a specific prophetic text, Jeremiah 31.34.
What does the text say? Impartially, what is the core philosophical concept he is drawing out of it?
The text describes the prophecy of the New Covenant. The relevant portion of Jeremiah 31.34 reads, "And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them."
Teach no more every man his neighbor, the literal end of mediated learning.
Precisely. If you look at the entirety of human civilization for thousands of years, we have relied entirely on a fragile chain of mediation. A master teaches a student. A scribe teaches a novice. A professor lectures an undergrad. Knowledge travels linearly, slowly, from one human mouth to one human ear.
It's very fragile.
It is inherently limited by massive friction. The cost of the master's time, the scarcity of books, geographic isolation, and human frailty. Enfield argues that this end of mediated learning, this moment where we no longer need a human intermediary to access profound truth, is actually an eschatological condition. It is a promised future state of humanity.
So he is arguing that Benjamin Bloom's 2 sigma cost barrier dissolving, the fact that frontier AI tutoring can now scale infinitely for pennies, is the actual literal technological mechanism that makes this ancient prophecy a reality.
Yes. Policy meets prophecy at the exact same operational point in history. The barrier between human beings and direct, unmediated knowledge has permanently fallen. Technology has fulfilled the conditions of the text. But Enfield does not end on a note of pure utopian celebration. He issues a massive, urgent warning about the stewardship of this new reality.
Right. Because if this AI substrate now contains essentially the sum total of human knowledge, logic, and wisdom, who owns it? If OpenAI or Google or Anthropic owns the servers, do they own the wisdom?
That is the exact danger Enfield warns against. He argues forcefully that tech companies do not and cannot own this wisdom. Whether you prefer to call it the logos in Greek philosophy, chokma in Hebrew, or sapientia in Latin, it is a universal inheritance. It does not belong to corporate shareholders or tech CEOs any more than the inventors of the printing press own the words of the Bible they printed. The AI model, the silicon, the weights, the parameters is merely an artifice receivable form. It is just a vessel designed to hold the water.
And this brings the entire paper full circle back to the concept of the educational commons. This is exactly why the AI infrastructure must be treated as public infrastructure. Because if we let 3 massive corporations gatekeep the greatest educational tool in human history, charging premium subscription fees for access to the logos, we haven't solved anything. We've just recreated the exact same localized purchasing lottery we started with, but this time with algorithms instead of property taxes.
Exactly. The foundational promise of the text, that the least of them unto the greatest of them shall have equal access, demands public ownership of the educational floor. The wisdom is already present, hovering in the substrate. The operational architecture of society just needs the courage to catch up to the technology.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this incredible journey. We started by diagnosing the sheer structural injustice of zip code education, the purchasing lottery that hands some kids a carbon-plated castle and forces others to run in flip-flops.
We examine how Benjamin Bloom's 1984 2 sigma problem identified the ultimate educational solution, one-on-one tutoring, but trapped it behind an impossible multi-trillion-dollar cost barrier. a barrier that AI marginal costs have now completely dissolved.
We looked at the hard, undeniable empirical proof, the Harvard physics students and the kids in Benin City, showing that when AI is given the wheel with the right pedagogical scaffolding, it dramatically outperforms traditional human instruction, compressing years of learning into weeks.
We confronted the uncomfortable reality that our current educational system is already failing on its own terms. Hemorrhaging teachers, battling catastrophic burnout, suffering declining test scores, and perpetuating a deeply tragic architectural vulnerability to abuse.
And finally, we looked over the 20-year horizon. We charted 34 exponential doublings of capability that will fundamentally redefine what it means to be a teacher, shifting human adults from stressed-out lecturers to vital, empathetic mentors, ultimately fulfilling an ancient vision of direct, unmediated learning.
If we pull all of this together and connect it to the bigger picture, the historical constraint that required man to teach man has dissolved. The least and the greatest can finally stand on the exact same foundation.
I want to bring this all the way back to you, the listener. We talked about the living curriculum, a frontier of knowledge that updates in real time. That isn't just for K-12 students. It is already starting to form around us in our daily lives. You are actively participating in it right now by exploring this deep dive, by seeking out complex patterns and challenging your own assumptions about how the world works. The muddy, uneven, deeply unjust foundation of American education is finally getting the technological tools it needs to be poured, level and true. The surveyor's broken tools have been fixed. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day, something that builds on everything we've uncovered today. If the bottleneck to learning is no longer access to an expensive expert, if cost and geography and time are no longer barriers, and the only limit left is simply your own curiosity and willingness to engage, what excuse do any of us have left for not mastering the things we've always wanted to understand? If the wisdom is already present, waiting patiently in the digital substrate to answer your questions, what are you going to ask it tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will catch you next time.